With the rising popularity of endurance events such as marathons and Hyroxes, especially over the last few years, there has been an abundance of information created around how to work out and how to prepare for these. But one area of fitness which needs to catch up is the area around nutrition and fueling for these events. If abs are made in the kitchen, that implies that the majority of your performance during these workouts and come the actual day will be down to how you fuel your body. And so today we're going to dive into the best ways and how to do that. Welcome back to my channel, I'm Tom, and I dive into aspects under the broad umbrella of longevity purely because they interest me. When it comes down to this topic and fueling, I've got a marathon coming up towards the end of the year, and while I feel very prepared in terms of the workouts that I need to do, the fueling is one thing that I couldn't quite get my head around, and all the content that I've seen is sort of brushed over that aspect. So in this video, what I'm going to do is break it down so that I understand it a little bit more and I can implement that into my marathon plan. Now, before we dive into which the best fuel source is, we first have to understand a little bit about fuel production. Now, whether you're sitting at a desk, typing away at a computer, tying your laces ready for a long run, you will need to use fuel. Whether that comes in the form of carbs, fats, proteins, all three can be used, but the efficiency of them is vastly different. So carbohydrates definitely preferred, and we'll dive into that a little bit later, but you can also use protein and fats when those carbohydrate stores are depleted. To fully understand fuel production, we first have to understand metabolism. Now, metabolism is a process within the body that changes the food that we consume into energy. Now, specifically, it changes the food that we eat into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is the body's main fuel source and is used for processes like cell division and muscle contraction. So let's start by looking at carbs. We're going to break this into the two categories, simple and complex carbs. And we're going to break each one of these down into the natural and unnatural sources. So starting with simple carbs, we've got natural sources which include fruits, vegetables, foods containing lactose, and these are quite nutritious when it comes down to their micronutrient content. Whereas on the other side, we've got the unnatural sources, which is what you'd recognize as unhealthy. Sweets, chocolates, sugary drinks, definitely a lot more calorie dense without adding that nutritional value. And when moving on to complex carbs, we've got this same division. So we've got those natural sources such as brown rice, oats, barley, and these are a lot slower digesting, but a lot more nutritious. And these whole grain foods are a fantastic source of sustained energy. Likewise, we've also got these sort of more processed foods like white bread, white flour, definitely a lot less nutritious than their whole grain alternatives. Now, this doesn't mean you should avoid simple carbs. They definitely have their place. For example, a lot of athletes will consume simple carbs right before a big race or an event. And that rapid spike in blood sugar means that the energy is a lot more readily available to the working muscle. Now, the reason simple carbs are favored as pre-race nutrition is because they're made up of much smaller molecules. And so this means they're broken down and absorbed a lot easier by the body. This includes foods like cereals, toast, and sweets, but that definitely doesn't mean that complex carbs don't have their place. This long-lasting energy is still really important. It just means you have to consume it further ahead of training. And this can include foods such as rolled oats, berries, and pasta. You've probably heard the term glycogen when reading or listening around this topic before. And glycogen is very simply the way in which the body will store excess glucose after it's used all that it needs. It will store it in two main places. So number one, in the muscles, and glycogen in the muscles can only be used by the muscles. So when that muscle needs to contract, expand, whatever it might be. And then secondly, in the liver. Now, liver glycogen levels are generally released slowly throughout the day to keep energy levels and blood sugar constant. If you're training with a high frequency or high intensity, the value that carbohydrates will bring to you as a fuel source is by delaying the onset of fatigue and enhancing endurance. And to see exactly how this works, we're going to look at a paper from 2015, specifically on team sport performance, and specifically pre-exercise nutrition and then during the exercise nutrition. The experiment looked at 6 football players during a 4-a-side 90-minute football match, and the players were split into 2 groups and given one of 2 diets. One group was given a diet where carbohydrates made up 65% of the daily energy intake they needed, and the other group was given a diet where carbohydrates only made up 30%. Now, the muscle glycogen levels of those on the high carb diet was 28% higher than those on the low carb diet. And this also meant that the players in that group performed 30% more high intensity running than their counterparts. It should be noted that there's no difference in technical skills reported, just energy output. As you can see, this is pretty much a direct correlation between the level of muscle glycogen you have and the energy that you're able to exert. Sticking with muscle glycogen levels, there's a recommendation where you should have a high carbohydrate meal around 3 hours before your sport or exercise. And if you focus this meal on high glycemic index or simple carbs at a rate of 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight, you'll increase your muscle glycogen levels by 11 to 15%, which will lead to a greater energy output during the exercise itself. The same paper also looked at fueling during the exercise, and first they wanted to see if this made any difference at all. Now, relative to a placebo group which received nothing, the participants in which they gave a 6.5% carb electrolyte solution had a 33% greater power output. Interestingly, when they took this one step further and they started to measure the concentration, which was the most effective, you'd assume that the greater the concentration, the more energy output. But this wasn't the case. They actually found that when looking at a 2, a 6, and a 10% solution, those who took the 6% solution had the greatest effect on their energy levels. Now, the results of this do have to be taken with a pinch of salt, as the participants were teenagers, and I think there were around 7 of them, but the effect of concentration is interesting nonetheless. And these findings are in no way new. In 1925, so 100 years ago, there was a paper published out of the US examining the potential benefits of carbohydrates for those running the Boston Marathon. They tested the effects of carb ingestion both pre-race and during, and found a very close correlation between the condition of the runner at the finish line and their blood sugar levels. Now, this suggests that the ingestion of carbs both pre and during the race led to a decreased risk of hypoglycemia and exhaustion. So now we know there's a definite benefit of fueling before and during exercise. How much should we actually be fueling? Sports dietitian Renee McGregor says that it takes around 500 grams of carbohydrates to fill your glycogen stores. And at most, this will last you around 60 to 90 minutes, running at 55 to 75% of your max heart rate. Her recommendation here is that you consume 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour for the first 3 hours of your endurance event, a marathon in this case, and then increase this to 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour after that. A lot of people talk around carb loading, which can be done up to 3 days before one of these endurance events. And the easiest way that I've found to do this and put my research is just by swapping out various parts of your diet for more carbohydrates. So maybe decrease your protein content at night and just swap that out for some more carbs. Replace that handful of nuts you have as a snack for some toast or a bagel. And while this carb loading does really help build up your muscle glycogen levels, your liver glycogen levels do deplete very quickly. And so the morning of this big race or sporting event, definitely focus on simple carbs to build up these liver glycogen levels and just keep your blood sugar constant throughout the event. So now we know the different types of carbs, how we break them down and use them for energy, and also if we were to apply this practically, let's say to a marathon, what that would look like. But where does that leave fats? Fats take longer to break down than carbs, and so they're viewed as a less efficient fuel source because they are more costly from a metabolic point of view. However, your body does prefer to use fats as a fuel source for low intensity exercise. Number one, because we just have more fat stored within the body. And number two, we as a species have evolved to use fat wherever possible to preserve our muscle glycogen levels for whenever we really need it. When talking on the difference in efficiency between fat and carbs, metabolism really comes into play. So oxygen is key for metabolism, very key component. And when we are exercising with a low intensity, where we prefer to use fat as a fuel source, this is because we've got oxygen a lot more readily available. We're working aerobically and the metabolism isn't really an issue. However, if we increase the intensity or the frequency with which we're working out, we move into this anaerobic state. And this is where oxygen is less readily available, metabolism comes into play a lot more. And because carbohydrates and glycogen are a lot easier to metabolize, this is where we switch our preference of fuel source to one of those. Outside of being used as fuel, fats have so many different functions within the body, such as temperature regulation, hormone production, and being used to cushion our organs. So fat shouldn't be excluded from your diet at all. There are 4 different types of fats. The first being monounsaturated fats, which are viewed as one of the healthy fats. These are found in plant foods such as nuts, avocados, and olive oil. The other type of healthy fats are polyunsaturated fats, similarly found in plant foods such as nuts and seeds, and also food like salmon. Saturated fats aren't as healthy and are found in foods like palm oil, coconut oil, ice cream, butter, and red meat. Excessive consumption of these can lead to weight gain and high cholesterol. And then the final type of fat is trans fat, and this is definitely the worst type of fat to eat. These fats can raise bad cholesterol and lower good cholesterol, which leads to more of a health risk. These sources are, as you'd expect, fried foods, frozen meals, vegetable oils, to name a few. Actually, one benefit of using fats as a fuel source over carbohydrates is that they have a positive benefit on blood sugar levels. The anti-inflammatory and antioxidative properties of unsaturated fats actually support heart health and help us improve our insulin resistance. Going back to that original question of which the better fuel source is, fats or carbs, it really depends on what you're using that fuel for. The utility of fat comes into play for low intensity exercise, as this is where we have more oxygen readily available. But when we move to high intensity exercise and the metabolism really comes into play, this is where we will switch that dependence and that favorability to carbohydrates and muscle glycogen. While actually engaging in the activity or sport, simple carbs are going to be the best fuel source for you, as they're the easiest to digest. This holds true for both weight training and endurance training, and being that the ideal workout routine has a mix of high intensity and low intensity, we can say that all diets should have a mix of both fat and carbs. This has been really eye-opening for me. Now, alongside the marathon plan that I already have, I can focus on not necessarily fueling for those easy runs and using up that fat as an energy source, but then also for those higher intensity or longer runs, fueling correctly and fueling at the correct intervals as well. Catch you next time.